Yeah.
Hello, everybody. This is Constance from Mysterious Galaxy. I want to thank you all so much for joining us. Technical difficulties are bound to happen in the age that we are in, so thank you for your patience. It was just one of those nights where the internet and technology was not being the most cooperative. But we are very happy to kick off the event. I'm super excited. We have a Kensington Mystery Panel that we are bringing you tonight. And Charlie is with us in spirit and potentially maybe making a guest appearance, but currently Peter Colt in the chats is Charlie. And the actual Peter Colt is right on this side of me. And then we also have Jen right down here, and then Lisa Black diagonally pointing right down there. I am just that is my super, super brief intro since you guys have been waiting and you're here to listen to the authors talk and really not me. So I'm going to let them give more of an introduction about themselves as the authors as well as their new books, which are out. Before I leave the Vanna White section, two little things just to let you know about. If you look down below, there's a beautiful button that says ask a question. As it would imply, if you click that, it will pop up a box where you can ask questions. Authors, whenever you're ready to ask questions, if you'd like, let me know and I can pop back on and I can moderate that section for you guys. And then also, if you would like to purchase these books, because what better way to celebrate new books in the world? Purchase them. I'm slightly biased as a bookseller, but yes, there is a purchase link down below where you can also buy these books. I will go ahead and leave you in the amazing hands of these authors, and I will see you guys for the questions. Have a good event, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so we were going to actually start with a quick rundown. I have the original list from Charlie in front of me. So, Lisa, do you want to start with a rundown of your books?
Yes. Go right ahead.
Okay, I was going to say, why don't you start?
Okay. My name is Lisa Black. I'm a forensic specialist with a police department here in Florida. And I've been in forensics for like 25 years. I started at the coroner's office in Cleveland, Ohio, and then I moved to, my husband dragged me 1,400 miles away from Cleveland to Florida. So I do work full time. I'm mostly doing fingerprints, crime scene, photography. We handle, it's like a relatively low crime area. So we handle everything from criminal mischief to homicides. And we just had one on Sunday, which is why I'm kind of tired because it's been a really busy week. I have published 15, I keep losing track, books of forensic suspense. And the latest is Every Kind of Wicked. My characters in this series is Maggie Gardner, who's a forensic specialist with the Cleveland, Ohio Police Department, and Jack Renner, who has a sideline of taking the worst of the city's criminals, the ones that never get convicted because they never leave enough evidence to get into a courtroom in the first place. And he doesn't hate them. He doesn't enjoy killing. He knows they're just a product of their environment. So he sits them down and plies them with their favorite food and drink and listens to them. And when they're about as relaxed and happy as it's possible for them to get in this world, he puts 3 bullets in the back of their heads. Because to him, this is the responsible and humane thing to do. And, you know, he's very careful, always does his homework, always gets the right guy. And this is going very well until Maggie, the forensic specialist, picks up his trail. And then he has quite the moral dilemma of what to do. So that's what powers the series. At the end of the first book, she makes a decision that makes her vulnerable too. So she can't quite expose him without exposing herself. So they have this very uneasy truce going, and he's always kind of wondering when her conscience might get the better of her and she'll put them both in jail. So that's what's going on during the series. In Every Kind of Wicked, they are dealing with the group I love to hate, phone scammers. You know, the people who are constantly calling you, telling you they can lower your credit card interest rates, and because what they really want you to do is give them your credit card number, and that's never going to end well. And that's the topic I tackle in this book. So, take it away.
Okay, Peter, how about you?
I'm Peter Colt. I'm a police officer in New England, and I'm a veteran of the Army Reserve with deployments to Kosovo and Iraq. I write the Andy Rourke series of books. This is my latest one. I remembered it this time. I don't know if everybody can see that. There we go. Andy Rourke is a private investigator in the Boston and New England area in the 1980s. He's a Vietnam veteran, and he's dealing with sense of survivor's guilt and isolation, a little bit of PTSD. And this is really what sort of paired him off from normal society and allows him to go out and do the things that he does.
That sounds great.
And what's this book about?
Oh, I'm sorry. Of course. In this book, Andy has been, he's sort of trying to escape Vietnam and put it behind him, and he's being sort of dragged back in. He's developed a friend who is a Vietnamese refugee. He's also dealing with, he's asked to investigate the murders of 2 Vietnamese men in the Boston area. And he comes across a corrupt group of former South Vietnamese army officers who are trying to start the counter-revolution, if you will. And so it has it all: murder, action, and suspense.
Sounds great.
That does sound really good. I'm Jen J. Danna. I also write as Sarah Driscoll. So I have a number of series. I have the Abbott Lowell Forensic Mysteries, which I write with a partner, Ann Vanderland. And then together, Ann and I write the FBI Canine Thriller series, and that's under the sort of the joint pseudonym of Sarah Driscoll. I also write a new series called the NYPD Negotiators. And Peter, you'll be glad to know that I made the rookie mistake this time and forgot to bring a book. So last time was Peter, this time it was me. So Exit Strategy is the first book in the NYPD Negotiators series. And this series sort of started because in the first Sarah Driscoll book, Lone Wolf, I had a hostage negotiator as a character. And this character always kind of stuck with me because I thought he sort of existed in an interesting sort of space where he was part of law enforcement, but in some ways was sort of being counter to what a lot of law enforcement wanted to do, especially in a crisis situation when you have a tactical team that wants to go in and end a crisis situation. The hostage negotiator is actually sort of standing in the middle between the suspect and the police, trying to keep peace. And things didn't go too well for the character in that particular book, but that was sort of what started me on this, and that was what led me to Gemma Capello, who is a hostage negotiator with the NYPD. And in this particular book, the catalyst that starts the whole thing off is when a hostage taker walks into City Hall and takes some of the mayor's staff and the first deputy mayor hostage. And Gemma is part of a law enforcement family. Her brothers and her father are in the NYPD, and one other brother is in the FDNY. And so there's sort of this sort of group ensemble feel through this book and moving forward into the series because Gemma's brothers and her father can sort of assist in cases. So you get sort of a nice sort of family dynamic out of this book and out of the series. So that is Exit Strategy. Now, back to the list. Okay, so one thing we wanted to talk about was what's your writing process like? What does a typical year look like for you when you write a manuscript, from brainstorming to writing to editing? How does that look for you guys? Lisa, you want to start?
Okay, sure. I'll spend a couple months just thinking about it. I mean, I tend to take like a long break between books. So once I finish a book, it's like the pressure's off. I don't immediately jump into the next one. I take plenty of time and just kind of think about it. So I'll spend, months just deciding until I decide on basically the topic that I want it to be about. Like this book is about phone scammers and a pill pushing physician who's can't be found anywhere, but is still out there writing prescriptions. And, another book was basically about the financial crash of 2008. And another book was about newspapers and the decline of print media. So once I get on a topic, then I'll start researching, and I'm reading all sorts of books about the subject. And then I'll eventually come up with an outline. I'm a plotter. I do have to know. I have to know how it begins, how it ends, who's going to get killed, why, who's going to be killing them, and the major clues. I'm not fanatical about outlining. I keep promising myself that I'm going to do a really good, solid, detailed outline this time, and I never do. And I wish I would. And then once I start writing, I generally write about 1,000 words a day, with time off for vacations and major holidays and nothing else, until I get the first draft done, and that's usually about 3-4 months. Usually about 4 months. Then I'll do a second draft, and then usually I'll send it to my sisters and make them read it, and they'll get back to me, and then I'll do a third draft. And then by this point, I pretty much can't stand to ever look at it again, so I'll send it to my agent, and then she'll have it for a while, and then she'll send it back with, suggestions and things like that. We go back and forth. So generally it will, work out to a book a year.
That's good. How about you, Peter?
So an idea takes root in my head. Maybe it's a scene or something that I see my character doing, or something he's in the middle of. And then I kind of build a synopsis around it. And so I know how the books all end. I know how they start, and I sort of have a vague idea of the middle and the characters, and characters that I thought were going to be in the books don't quite make it, and characters who get inspired by something else sort of find their way in the book. And I kind of liken it to a frog hopping on a pond with lily pads. And it's about getting that character from one lily pad to the next till he's across the pond. So I do not write 1,000 words a day. Not my best days, maybe, but so it's a drawn out process for me. I am so glad to hear that somebody else kind of gets a little bit tired of their own product once it's done, because you write these things, then you read them, then you reread them, and you rewrite them, and then somebody else reads them, then it comes back and you reread it, and then that's months before the red ink comes back, the bloodbath on the printed page, which is always very gentle from my editor, but nonetheless. So by the time the thing gets out there, it's kind of nice not to see it when it's in production or pre-production. So
I think that's kind of a universal feeling that you sort of, by the time you're finished with it, it's just like, oh, please get it away, and then I find that, you send it off, you've done your developmental edit, and then there's a bit of a gap, or you've done your copy edit, there's a bit of a gap. And then when you get the galleys back as the printed stack of papers, it's almost like an all new book. Like it's kind of refreshing at that stage. It's like, oh, this wasn't as bad as I kind of remember it being. So you remember it through all the pages, right?
Right.
So that's
exactly.
Yeah. For me, I think we all kind of plan about the same way. Is sort of what it sounds like. I call it milestoning, where you basically try to hit the big plot points. But I actually find that's good, because that leaves you a little bit of leeway to take a left turn while you're writing, because sometimes, like those creative left turns can sometimes produce the best stuff. But yeah, when you're writing crime, all of and especially found this, and I'm sure you do too, Lisa, with the forensic crime books that I write, like all of the little evidence bits have to add up in the end so that it makes sense. So those ones required like a certain amount of just case plotting, whereas characterization could maybe be a little bit more loosey-goosey. I'm certainly under a bigger time crunch than anybody else, because I'm contracted for 2 books a year. So I have a book that's due on February 1st, and I have a book that's due on August 1st, and God help me, they have to be due on those days. And so I give myself about a month to plan and do research, and then I take about 10 weeks to do the first draft. And that's where I am currently with FBI Canine number 6. And to me, I don't know about you guys, that's the hardest part. Getting the story out of your head and onto the page is the hardest part of the whole process for me. And then I do a couple of edits. If it's Ann and I together, we do the couple of edits together. I don't send it to my agent. I have a critique team of 4 people who are fantastic and have been with us since the beginning, and with me on my solo book since the beginning. And maybe they're like your sisters, Lisa. They will rip it limb from limb, which is great. Actually, my harshest critic is my husband. He is the one who is the, has the, you've got to be kidding me meter going all the time. Like he calls all of the stupid stuff, but that's great because that's the stuff that I want to have called before it goes to my editor.
Yeah.
So because of my critique team, God bless them. I don't think I could do this without them. I get what goes to my editor is actually a fairly polished book. So. But yeah, once I finish one book, I give myself about 2 days, maybe a weekend, and then I just turn around and start the next one because I don't have time for anything else.
Yeah, I could not do that, I don't think.
I don't know how long I'm going to be able to keep it up, but I sort of see retirement for my day job. I'm a lab manager, and I'm working on COVID right now, and so this is important, and we want to stick with it. But I'm kind of hoping in a couple of years I can retire, and then, the 2 books a year will be at a somewhat more leisurely pace.
Oh my gosh. I have no idea how you do that and work full time too.
Well, yeah, it's hard. My family is very understanding, and my husband especially is very understanding because he knows that, it's like, okay, it's after dinner. Bye. See you when you come upstairs at 11:35 for Colbert. That's about it, because I do work right up until his monologue.
Man.
So here's another question. How has the pandemic, because we've all been living with this, as you can see how we're all living with this, and Charlie, we missed you. We wouldn't be doing this virtually like this without the pandemic. How has this affected your writing? How has it affected your work process? And is this something that you ever want to acknowledge in what you're doing now or what you're doing in the future?
It hasn't affected me so much because I guess we're lucky, the 3 of us. We qualify as essential. First time in my life anyone's ever called me essential, but I got to keep going to work. So I didn't have to adjust to work again. There's really no way to do forensics at home. That's kind of frowned upon anyway. So I got to keep going to work. So my life didn't get that disrupted that much, but I think like everyone else in the country, I'm finding it really hard to concentrate. And I have no idea why. I think we're all super stressed, but we don't, it's just not an obvious stress. But
so I think you're right. I think there's like a level of stress that we're all just sort of used to living with at this point, because every time you leave your house, you have to take all these precautions. And if you're stuck in your house because you're not going out, it's stressful, and that it's hard on your creativity.
Yeah, it is. It is somehow. But for writing, I intend to completely pretend like this never happened. I'm not going to even approach it in my books. Not planning to anyway. Unless in the future I can work it. I'm like, oh, I could work that into the plot, and then maybe I'll change my mind. So what about you, Peter?
Like you, essential, going to work, and I really think it's like white noise. It's always kind of in the background, hovering. The nice thing about writing about 1982, 1985 is that COVID doesn't exist yet in my world. So for me, the writing is like a nice little break from it. I have no intention of writing about it. It's so much at the forefront right now. I think if people pick up an Andy Rourke book, they want that escape. And the last thing I want to do is, throw reality back in their faces.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. I too am not planning on actually including it anywhere. I don't know. I think we're all tired of it. And I'm tired enough of it that in the day job that I just don't want to, deal with it. It's like people say, why don't you write a bio thriller? It's because then it's just like I've never left the day job. It's just pathogens and viruses all day long, So this was the first time that I ever asked for an extension on a manuscript for the second book in the NYPD Negotiators, because it was just the chaos and the day job was just going nuts all day and all night because we were trying to get these clinical trials for COVID off the ground, and all working from home meant was now that you didn't have a defined work day. You just worked all the time. And I was only going into the lab for maintenance and for samples. And so I was working from home most of the time. And so, I actually did get, it's the first time that I've asked for an extension and was graciously granted it. But yeah, because it was just, how are you creative when the world is on fire all around you? It's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so let's see. Here's a good one. So what advice would you give to an aspiring writer or to yourself when you were younger, knowing what you know now about writing and publishing? Lisa?
You need to take charge of your own career, which is one of those things that sounds great. I mean, your agent, your publisher can only do so much, but they have other writers to be promoting, and you only have yourself, so you have to put as much of you as you possibly can into it. And that's one of those things that's much easier said than done, because it's like we're all willing, but what do you do? It's when it comes to publicity and marketing, everything just feels like one tiny drop in a huge, huge ocean. So there is no surefire way to do things. So it's a little bit of asking the impossible, but definitely you want to believe that all you have to do is write the book and that's it, but it's not. You're gonna,
oh, it's so not.
Yeah, you may need to get a lot more aggressive than you ever wanted or thought you'd need.
Okay, Peter, what do you think?
I'm kind of a bad person to ask. I lucked into this. I got on base at the first time at bat, and to use a sports metaphor, which I hate, but I just got really lucky. I think the advice that I would give younger me is, don't wait so long to try. If you think you have the idea, if you think you have it, try and extend yourself. And, you're going to take some bumps, but you won't get anything if you don't try, I guess is the point that I'm trying to make. So.
Yeah, I can kind of echo that, because, I mean, I don't think, and none of us have like a literary sort of background. Nobody has a master's of fine arts, right?
No.
We're all career people. Two of us are science people. In Canada, you go up to grade 13 with English. That's all I have. I didn't even take English in university. But you read a lot and you learn craft from reading really good writers. You don't have to actually go to school for that. And so for me, it was always, and for me and Anne, when we were together, are together, we always just sort of said, like you did, Peter, we sort of said, go big or go home. Like, I would rather fail and, go down in flames than look back 15 years later and say, well, why didn't you even try? So yeah, give it a try. But then the piece of advice I would give would be persistent, because if you want to be traditionally published, you have to, and you want to go out and you try and find an agent, it can take a really long time to find an agent. And I had a spreadsheet. I know Lisa did it the same way. You send out 6 or 8 queries a week, and then all of the rejections come in, and you're like, but you send out 6 or 8 more queries the next week. And it took me 6 months to find an agent. Nick was agent 144 on my spreadsheet. And from the moment she read the manuscript, it was 3 weeks before she signed me. So you're persistent, and when you finally make that right connection, it can actually move really quickly. So that would be sort of my piece of advice, is that you just have to sort of stick to your guns. If it's something that you really want to do, you just have to keep trying. Yeah.
I think to dovetail too is that, I didn't have that experience, but what I did have to come to realize is my vision initially for what my character was, what the book was, changed significantly. And you have to have a thick skin. You have to, when you pour your heart and soul into something, especially the first one, and somebody says, hey, this is great, and we really like this, and can you make a change here? Or what do you think about this? And, I used to joke that if I have to wear a pink tutu and dance around to get my thing, published, then great, that's what we'll do. Fortunately, it didn't come to that. Agent who's really great and a great editor. So
you can still do that for one of these author events, though.
We'll talk about that offline. I don't think we want to chase the prospective buyers away. So, but yeah, I think you just have to, you will you're gonna hear some things that you may not like at times, and they're usually phrased very gently, but you have to stick with it.
Well, and sometimes they're not phrased very gently. And so, I mean, I don't know whether you guys ever read your own reviews, but
Ooh.
people, yeah, they can be brutal.
I
So,
won't, I'm afraid.
yeah, no, I don't blame you for that. You know, they always say the advice is if you're having a bad day because I mean, sometimes people send you a review on Twitter or something and they like tag you in it, so you can't miss it. Readers, please don't do that. You know, they say you should go and read 1-star reviews for Stephen King or Tolkien, or, you know, everybody gets 1-star review, right? It's, you know, you're not going to please all the people all the time. So that's always a good way that you can kind of sort of, you know, hold your head up. But yes, you definitely do have to have a thick skin for this business, because it's just, you know, it's just so much of it just depends on people's tastes, and you're not going to please everybody. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the most nerve-wracking, since we're on this topic, rewriting and making changes to your manuscript is one of the most nerve-wracking parts of writing. Like your critique partners, your agents, your friends, you know, your publisher might have things that they suggest you change. And I think in any profession, there's going to be times when you should listen to their advice, and there's going to be times when you should stick to your guns. And I'm sure we've both had to do, we've all done both at times, but you often don't know which is the right time. And rewriting itself, that's why I hate rewriting so bad, because I honestly don't know whether I'm making it better or worse.
Have you had the same, just here's a question to sort of go into that. Have you had the same editor for a long time?
Well,
at Kensington,
yeah. For this current series, yes.
So you must have, like I do, I feel with Essie, like a really good sort of relationship where you sort of understand each other, and you sort of understand where the series is going, and that can really help.
Yes, and I mean, I trust her judgment. You know, I always trust her judgment, and my agent too. It's like, even when it's something I don't want to change and I don't want to hear it, you know, but I always think, well, you know, they do this for a living, and and they probably know better than I do about what would be best here. Yeah.
But it can't be a real partnership. The relationship between you and your agent, and you and your editor.
Because you all want the book to succeed, so you're all working toward the same goal. That's what
and you know, definitely there's that real partnership, but also, like you, I view it as, well, between them they've probably read and edited tens of thousands of books successfully. So you know, they might be onto something when they tell me, like, you know, kid, this phrase doesn't quite work, or you know, maybe this thing isn't quite the direction, you know. So it helps to have that trust. And, you know, I hope to have, say, 15 books later, we're still at it, we're still a great team, and that's the goal. So
yeah, no, for sure. How about we sort of talked about how our backgrounds and how we don't sort of have a real literary background, and how probably all of us read, I was a voracious reader as a kid and as a teenager and as an adult. So what about who's sort of been your influence when it comes to writing, when, you know, the authors that you followed, be they classic or modern authors?
Well, I'd say my biggest influence was actually Alistair MacLean, who did not write murder mysteries. He wrote kind of like spy thrillers, but I not only read everything he published, I have a copy of everything he published. I mean, accumulated over the years at garage sales and things like that. I got a box full of paperbacks. But just the way he kept the action moving, and there's always a little touch of humor, and there's always just the tiniest bit of romance. I always say I went to the Alistair MacLean School of Romance, which is when the male lead and the female lead like never touch each other the entire book, and on the last page they decide to get married. I'm like, and that was fine with me. That was all the romance I needed, and that's, you know, that was fine with me. So I definitely, I think, copied his style a lot, and then I was also influenced, I think, by Ellery Queen and all the Golden Age mystery writers who have, 8,000 clues and they all fit together perfectly. And that's my goal. And P.D. James, I was another huge
nice choice.
She could be so detailed but never boring, and she was just fascinating.
Yeah. How about you, Peter?
This will surprise absolutely nobody. Raymond Chandler was a huge influence, not just his novels, but also his essays about writing. Robert B. Parker. James Crumley certainly is another one who probably a little more obscure. And then I read a lot of military history. And so that kind of informs the writing too. But I think I read every Alistair MacLean there was that I could get my hands on. So I definitely understand what you're saying about that. So,
did you read Ross MacDonald? I read it.
Of course, yeah. You have to.
He was my of the private eye genre. He was definitely my favorite.
Yep, a solid contender.
For me, it was sort of I can blame my parents, thank my parents. My mother was a huge reader, had every Agatha Christie that there was, two of them for many of them because they started printing them with different titles in America. So she'd have both the UK and the American title of the same book. And my dad had a bunch of, quite a few actually, of Earl Stanley Gardner's, the original. So I have a bunch of first edition Earl Stanley Gardner's from his library, Arthur Conan Doyle. And I started young with my mother has a bunch of first edition Nancy Drews from when they first came out, and I used to read those as a kid. So I got hooked on mysteries very early.
Me too.
But I also love history, and I love sort of narrative, sort of historical fiction. Something like Eric Larson is amazing. And then when it comes to current mysteries, I really love Louise Penny, and not just because she's Canadian, but she has beautiful lyrical writing and great mystery plotting to boot. So she's really, really good. Yeah. So let's see what else is on our list here.
And not to interrupt, but whenever you would like to, I know the random.
Do we have your questions?
We have 7.
Oh,
yes.
Wow.
Oh, so
That's right.
if you
We have questions?
yeah. So I can start asking those.
That sounds awesome.
So let's see. This one says, "What was the first spark of an idea that began the writing of your books?"
Wow.
Well, for me, I've already kind of talked about that when it comes to the NYPD negotiators. It was definitely a character in Lone Wolf that was only on the page for about 200 words, but the character really caught me and just sort of simmered for years before I actually made a whole series around that particular position within law enforcement.
Interesting. Well, the very, very first book I wrote was actually very much like an Alistair MacLean. It was more of a spy thriller kind of thing than an actual murder mystery, although there was a murder involved. But I stole the basic idea from an old Banachek episode where this huge items disappear and you couldn't figure out why, and it turned out because it wasn't really the item, it was just like a shell of it. And so I used that. The book was never published, and probably shouldn't have been, but that gave me an idea. And for this particular series, it was like Jen, I had this scene in mind that just had been rattling around for years of Jack and how the very first book starts out on the very first 3 pages of Jack and his first victim, and just how that would go. And it just floated around for years until suddenly I was annoyed with another book that wasn't working, and I just sat down and wrote it. My agent said, "I love it. Let's write the rest of it."
So for me, I was deployed to Kirkuk, Iraq in 2008, and a lot of downtime between mission sets. And my wife had turned me on to this new thing called Facebook, And I'm from originally Nantucket Island, which is a small island off the coast of Massachusetts. And I started to reconnect with all these old friends, and I became very nostalgic for Nantucket of the 1980s, which was a kind of different place. And I was also reading this great book about John Plaster's Secret Commandos, which is about Green Berets in Vietnam and this very secretive mission they had. And I heard something that Raymond Chandler said in my mind about the detective, has to be isolated from society. He can't be married. He can't have a family because, what wife would want her husband to go off and get beaten up all the time, or words to that effect. And I said, great, this somehow became the stew that became my first book. And so that was it.
Nice. Very nice.
Interesting.
So for the next question we've got, it says, this is always interesting because I think naming anything is a challenge and my brain can't handle the bottomless amount of choices there are. But this one says, how do you choose character names? Do you do research or does it just feel right?
That's a good question. I'm obsessed with names ever since I was a kid and wanted to change. I don't remember what grade I was in, probably second. I wanted to change my name to Rosie after this pretty saloon girl in the Wild Wild West. It was my favorite show. And later when I saw the episode as an adult, I realized that Rosie was actually a hooker. But when I was a kid, that went right over me. So yeah, I'm obsessed by names. But to answer your question, what I do is I go to Social Security Administration, baby names. If you just Google that, they've got on the website, they have top 10, top 100 names of any year. So I kind of estimate about how old my character would be, go back to that year, the list of names, and just keep going until I find one that I like that seems to fit.
I tend to actually go I go through genealogy lists. So if I'm trying to put someone who is sort of based in a certain area or from a certain background, I'll go back to the 1700s and find the first families of that area and try to find something that sort of fits. And then that usually takes care of the surname, and then I try and find a first name that just sort of works for me. There's no sort of rhyme or reason for that. And doesn't sound like somebody else in the book or another character, that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I try to avoid alliterative names. To me, it doesn't quite fit for what I write. And names sort of start out maybe as one thing, and I chew them over, and they get modified in my brain. But it really, it's kind of about the euphoniousness of the name. It's how does it sound? How does it read? But there's a little bit of work that goes into it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next question. Sorry, I'm reading because you guys have touched on bits and pieces of the questions that we've got. Ooh, how about this one? What's the biggest difference between how crime is depicted in fiction versus what it's like in real life, especially because you guys have such experience with the real life versus the fictitious?
Solve rates, maybe?
Yeah.
I mean, you're hoping that there is a satisfying, for me, it's there needs to be at least an emotional justice ending to it, even if there's not a criminal justice ending. But let's face it, more often than not, we get our guy in the end. And unfortunately, and at least we'll be able to attest to this, in real life, the solve rates are not as perfect.
Yeah.
I think, and Lisa can probably speak a little bit more to this. It's not as glamorous in real life. I mean, in Hollywood, there's all sorts of blood splashed around, and there are these very dramatic deaths, and bullets knock people 50 feet back. But in reality, it's a pretty grim and, frankly, gross affair.
Well, and isn't it kind of described as 90% boredom and 10%, life and death terror?
That's pretty accurate.
And we leave the boredom part out.
Right, and you haven't lived until you've been in a third floor apartment over dealing with a corpse in mid-July.
Yeah.
That doesn't translate well to the books and movies.
No.
Oh yeah. Try being in Florida, and you're always in homes where the air conditioning isn't working or barely working. And yes, definitely not as glamorous as it looks on television. And also from a forensics point of view and just from regular police point of view, stuff that you would think proves the case really doesn't when you really look. Mostly everything indicates, it indicates you have two people in the house and one's dead. That indicates that the other person killed them. But, there's blood on the suspect's shirt, but he says he found the body. So that really doesn't tell you anything. And the homicide we just had here on Sunday is unfortunately like that. I mean, it's so obvious what happened. But if you take each little piece of the crime, it's not as clean cut as it should be.
It's kind of funny how the greatest arrest, the greatest grab, in the world, by the time it gets into the courtroom, it's a completely different thing. And, what seems like a great case on the street suddenly falls apart months later with, all sorts of evidence and disclosure and examination and cross-examination.
Well, also, I think evidence in real life is not always, as you said, as cut and dry. Like it's not
exactly.
It's not as black and white as we can sort of portray it in fiction, where it's sort of like definitely it's pointing are the murderer, but it's just not that in real life. PCR is just not that clean cut all the time. Samples are dirty, and it's not that straightforward.
Yeah.
And this case that we have, she obviously had an injury, but did the injury cause her to pass out later and maybe she face planted on the tile floor and that caused the other injuries, or were the other injuries caused by a person, and were they caused earlier or were they caused later? And so when you look at what seems to be this open and shut case, it's like we don't have a weapon, we don't have a time, we don't have a location. That is a real problem. That's not because lawyers are sneaky or anything like that. It's in fact, it could have a number of different explanations.
Yeah.
So nothing is ever black and white or simple or easy or fitting together all nicely.
That's the nice thing about writing. You can kind of make it that way.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Like with everything else. Like with everything else that is a reflection on life, it is just a bunch of shades of gray and trying to piece things together and figure out what's going on. This one's for me. I always like to ask this question, but it is, what part of your newest book was the hardest for you to write? And then which part brought you the most joy?
Ooh.
Huh. Wow.
Okay, I'm gonna go to the last book that I wrote because I'm a little too new into this one to have any of that yet.
Your deadline joy is not an option.
Yeah, yeah, that's my joy. I handed it in. It takes place on It's an inmate riot on Rikers Island, and for me, the hardest part of writing that book was trying to be sensitive, especially in our current climate. Trying to be sensitive to the fact that 95% of the inmates on Rikers are people of color and people who, are not as affluent as, a lot of the people in New York City are. And so trying to be sensitive to that fact that, I'm looking at it through the lens of, middle-class white gal. And these people coming into these situations would have had a very different life. So for me, that was the biggest challenge, and I think I pulled it off. I hope I did. I guess people will tell me later if I pulled it off, but I really hope so. I was trying to be very respectful of that. Greatest joy. That one's a little harder. I honestly do think meeting my deadline was probably the greatest joy on that one, because that was the book I asked for the extension on.
Well, in this current book, the hardest part for me is always in any book is like characterization and feelings, and trying to express the emotions of the different characters and what they're feeling at any given moment, because I did have Alistair MacLean, who was not big into introspection, and Ellery Queen, and those were my models. So it's like I could talk about the cigarette ash all day long, but what people are grieving over in their heart of hearts is not so easy for me to approach. So that part is always difficult to put in. But I think the part I loved the best was one scene where they're talking to this it's a kind of a long story, but it deals with the phone scammers and this one guy's experience with them, and he's actually under arrest, but he's like just rattling off this story, and he's so excited to actually tell somebody finally. That was a lot of fun to write. And then the very ending, the very last scene in the book was absolutely my favorite.
Nice.
So I write about a very small group of veterans who did something extraordinary in the Vietnam War. There are only a few hundred of them who did this one mission set called Studies and Observation Group. And, there are a bunch of them who are still alive, and there are a lot of Vietnam veterans who are still alive. And I live in mortal fear that I'm going to get an email or a message saying, oh, who do you think you are? You got this all wrong, or this or that. Or that I'm insensitive to the things that they've gone through. So that, for me, that's always the sort of double-edged sword. I love writing about this and exposing this or showing this part of the war that's very sort of unknown in even my own small way. But the struggle for authenticity, I could probably get a master's from all the books I've read about this one narrow topic of the war. So there's that. My greatest joy, I think it comes down to I have an editor and an agent who there was an aspect toward the end of the book that I really like and really wanted to make sure was in it. And I kind of wondered if they would let that happen, and they were very supportive of it. And, for me, that was great. And not just at the end, but there were several aspects that happened. And so to have that, that validation, especially, I know it's been a while because you guys have written so many more books, but your second book is this horrible thing. It's like, did I blow it? Did I ruin the magic? Do I still have it, or am I a one-shot wonder? And to get that validation from them was fantastic. Yeah.
That's nice.
Great.
I know we always hear of the horror.
Yeah.
Right.
It's rough.
Has this horrible
Especially
looming
if the first book goes over.
If it's any consolation, I really like this one a lot. So
That's good.
That's another good consolation and another great part of joy that it will bring. But so we are getting close to the end. So one of the things that I like to ask as kind of a good ending is, I know that these books just came out, and it seems crazy to ask what you're working on now and what's coming out next. But the reality, as you guys know as writers, is that these books weren't finished when they came out, and that you are deep in the trenches on working on other things usually. So I like to ask, what projects are you currently working on? And after people read these awesome books, what can they be looking for from you next?
Well, currently I'm just very beginning a possible new series about a forensic pathologist. Actually, yes. So which is kind of new territory for me because I'm not a pathologist. So unlike having a character as a forensic scientist where I don't hardly have to do any research or look anything up because I know it, now I'm going to have to do a lot of research. Yes, but it's interesting because it opens like a whole new world for me to delve into.
Nice. And many people may not know, but could you tell them just briefly the difference between being a pathologist versus a scientist when it comes to forensics?
Well, a pathologist is a doctor. forensic pathologists are the people who work in the coroner's and medical examiner's offices and actually do the autopsies. They actually, they cut them open, they look at the organs, they'll look at the toxicology reports, and they will decide on what is the cause of death. The medical examiner investigators are usually the people who come to the crime scenes, and they will usually assist in the autopsy and, do some cutting and things like that. But ultimately, it's the doctor that will decide on the cause of death. In every county, you have one coroner or one medical examiner, and all the other doctors in the office are the pathologist or assistant coroner or assistant MEs.
Nice. Awesome. I always think of, I don't know if you guys have ever watched NCIS, but Ducky was my favorite representation of that of all times.
Yeah.
He was a great man. But so, Jen, what are you currently working on?
So I have just finished the sequel to Exit Strategy. So that's Shot Caller, and it'll be out next summer. I'm working now on the 6th book in the FBI Canine series. So that'll be out like a year from now, a little over a year from now. So the next book that's coming out for me, though, is the 5th book in the FBI Canine series called Leave No Trace, and that's coming out on December 29th. So lots of books in the pipeline for me. They're coming out about every 6 months.
I'm working on the 3rd Andy Rourke novel, where he is asked by an old army buddy to find his missing daughter in Boston's notorious combat zone, which, for those of you who are not as old as I am or not from the Northeast, was a section of Boston from the 1960s through the 1990s, where they, in about a 5-acre area, packed all the strip clubs and dirty movie houses and dirty bookstores and things like that. And there's a lot of crime and prostitution. So, and my character feels he's, almost on this, it's almost his holy mission to find this girl for his buddy who saved his life in Vietnam.
Nice. A good crusade story is always great to dive in. Well, thank you so much to our authors for joining us, and to Charlie in spirit. Thank you for your writing author presence with us.
Thanks for hosting us.
Thank you so much, Rose.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So make sure that you check out Peter, Jen, Lisa's, and Charlie's books. The books are going to be where the purchase book button is. And thank you so much to everyone for attending, and to our amazing authors. I hope to see you physically next time. And it was a pleasure to see you virtually to celebrate these books, though, and have an amazing evening. Goodbye.
You too.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.